Morning all. My name is Gustav Hugo. I'm a founding team member and commercial lead at GES Labs. We're a phytopharmaceutical ingredient manufacturer in South Africa, dealing in cannabinoid and alkaloid-based ingredients. I'm here to talk to you today about the pharmaceuticalisation of medical cannabis and the market dynamics driving the trend in Europe. Also, we'll give some insights into how to position your business to leverage these dynamics and trends, as well as some insight into development pathways. So this talk comes from my and our team's Greenfield's experience in building out GES over the last 5 years. We started out as tech consultants and technology sales and tech consultancy on the wave of medicalization and decriminalization in the region, sort of the stage when we worked with Josh at that time. And it was a university project. We roped in the local glassblower and started building out labs and licensed facilities throughout SADC, so Congo, Lesotho, Malawi, and elsewhere. After some GMP experience, we realized that consulting wasn't really a scalable business model, at least in our space, and raised some capital to build out our current site in Cape Town, which is what you see there today. So we now have our GMP certification, deliver a range of products and ingredients across a couple of formats. We have some good stability data across the board and have successful partnerships in most accessible medical markets internationally. So our focus today is delivering value into medical markets with GMP compliance and competitive products across a range of formats. And our near and long-term goals include delivering registered APIs and finished preparations. So if we think about cannabis markets, we generally describe them in three subsets: adult or illicit markets, medical, unregistered medicines, the space most of us today operate in, and then pharmaceutical, which Ollie brought up earlier with GW Pharma, and registered APIs like dronabinol. So most commercial players outside of North America obviously operate in the medical space, with only a few successful operators having followed clinical registration pathways. And bringing into that the context of unregistered, we'll start with the Euro cannabis market just for some insight. So growing rapidly, estimated to be worth around just a little under 5 billion euros this year, with 516 million euros in expected sales by the end of the year across the region. It's driven by increasing awareness into product efficacy, evidence, and availability as well, as doctors are more willing to prescribe, and it's expected to reach 13.37 billion by 2027 with a 25% compound annual growth rate. Some of the key challenges, which I'm sure we're all too aware of, are regulatory uncertainty, high product costs, limited patient access, and all of that compounded by fragmented consumption and distribution patterns, as well as access pathways, with a lack of policy harmonization at a regional level. So moving on to medical cannabis and its availability as an unregistered medicine. So most supplies and access to medical markets nowadays are through this unregistered pathway. And it's in Europe distributed either as finished preparations in a very small incident, or as an API for magistrate preparations, for example, in Germany. Unregistered medicines typically refer to medical products that haven't undergone the full regulatory approval process and are used in specific circumstances like compassionate use programs and generally prescribed by a small subset of specialist physicians and where conventional treatments for those indications have failed. So most GPs in Europe, where medical markets are open, can prescribe, but are reticent to do so given the limited amount of clinical data available to them. And it serves, my argument at least, as an interim channel between pharmaceutical and adult use. We'll see later. Next slide. So when I talk about the pharmaceuticalization of medical cannabis, it's basically the process of developing and marketing cannabis products in a more traditional pharmaceutical way. So it involves the standardization of products, moving into clinical trials to test their efficacy and safety profiles, and the registration thereof with regulatory authorities. Today, there's over 2,000 trials ongoing around the world, most of those for the indication of pain or chronic pain. And if we look at a high level, the drug registration process goes through its development phase, so research and development of potential drug candidates, synthesizing, formulation, lab testing of those, and then into the preclinical stage. So your in vitro, in vivo trials, testing drug profiles, safety, efficacy, and potential side effects, and onto your phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials, progressively moving through each of those on successful outcomes of the prior. From there, you'll look to compile a CTD or new drug application, where it'll get submitted to the regulatory authority and be reviewed on all the data gathered through the previous stages. And finally, if the benefits outweigh potential risks of the drug, it'll be approved for marketing, where you move on to things like post-marketing approval and the rest of it. So why would one go this route? I mean, the medical cannabis industry is still in awe of Jazz's $7.1 billion or $7.2 billion acquisition of GW in 2021. A 2020 study published by the Journal of American Medical Association found that general drug development costs sit at around $1.3 billion and can take a number of years to materialize. So while the data for GW's products aren't readily available, it's estimated that it cost around $500 million to do Epidiolex and another $200 for Sativex. The process took 15 years on Epidiolex, and we can see today the value derived thereof. So if the above seemed like a lot, it is, but luckily there's some ways to accelerate that process and collaborate horizontally across each of the different development stages. And if we look at the preclinical side of things, so we can share data between organizations and researchers, modeling and simulations to predict drug behavior and reduce preclinical and animal testing scope. We can use in silico screening, so things like think AI drug development or drug formulation identifications. Then onto the clinical side of things, we can use patient registries to identify trial candidates and track drug performance, look at real world data, like some information from BFarm, for example, that I'll bring up later. And then patient-centric research, which focuses on improved patient outcomes, managing risks, which a lot of the medical programs are looking to do today with medical cannabis programs, beg your pardon. And then onto regulatory review. So regulatory science, which applies broader scientific principles and can look to accelerate and improve the regulatory approval process. International harmonization is a big one, which would mean broader access across regulatory authorities given a standardized approval process and scope. And then risk-based approaches. Anyone who's involved in GMP or GACP will understand that quite well. So where does one go and how do we start to look at these things and where to look for pharmaceutical development and direction? I'm no clinician, but some insight into these things. So a recent BFarm survey showed that there's improved patient outcomes for pain indications in more than 70% of cannabis prescriptions across formats. Flower is more effective than extract, with 91% improvement compared to a 70% improvement with other product formats. There was a 25% incidence of side effects. A study in the journal Pain found that improved outcomes for opioid treatments related to chronic pain were sitting between 60 and 70%. However, side effects in those cases were right up at 60%. So that split or deviation between side effects and improvement in clinical outcomes for patients shows that there's great opportunity, and it explains why most of the cannabis trials going on today are for pain type of indications. Another really interesting anecdote that I came across was that for Sativex, which is a balanced blend of THC, CBD, it had very high rates of improved outcome for patients in the off-label prescription of anorexia and wasting at 77.1% on the bottom right there. Now, Sativex is one of the GW's registered drugs. It's not approved by regulators for this indication, but we saw really positive outcomes in that case. So it speaks to the opportunities that are around for development of polymolecular medicines and broader scope of cannabis across a range of different treatment profiles. So having dug into some of the more complicated bits on the pharmaceuticalisation side of things, I'd like to relate this to broader context of cannabis consumption as a whole and infer some outcomes we're likely to see in the future. So today, obviously, the bulk of cannabis consumption takes place in the adult use market. We can see these are sort of European and drawn from global figures later on. But the medical and pharmaceutical subsets sit at a fraction of the adult use segment. This is for a number of reasons, which include legal frameworks, prohibitionist policies, price sensitivity, cultural factors. But there's two I'd like to draw your attention to, which are product diversity and availability. The illicit market offers a broader range of cannabis products and strains compared to the limited selection available through legal channels. This diversity appeals to consumers seeking specific varieties, potency levels, or consumption methods not readily available to them through medical or approved pathways. And then the other is personal autonomy and choice. People don't necessarily like to go through their doctor if they're getting something that works for them in any case. So they prefer the freedom that the black market provides. Might be reticent to navigate the complexities of medical cannabis programs and prefer not to disclose their health information to access legal cannabis. So something that many operators have not yet really carefully considered, that I think, is that medical cannabis, the commercialization pathway for most of us here today, is an interim market and will experience a shift later on as we see more and more liberalization and pharmaceuticalisation pulling it apart from both sides. Understanding the play requires some pretty good insight into the metrics and consumer demands on both sides, as well as all the different mechanics at play. So your legislative components, access pathways, domestic legislation when it comes to adult use and private models. For example, in Spain, I think one of the big reasons we haven't seen medical opening up is some insight that I'll give from, for example, the Netherlands now, where you've got readily available access through coffee shops. So a Trimbus Institute study found that there are about 130,000 people in the Netherlands who self-reportedly use recreational cannabis for medical reasons, whereas only 7,000 of them, or 7,000 patients, actually get their cannabis prescribed through the doctor. And those sorts of levels speak to the dynamics that I'm on about. And we can see similar in Canada, where recreational cannabis is available. So 27% of the population has used cannabis in the past 12 months. 25% of cannabis users across that segment report using it purely for medical reasons. This means that 5% of all Canadians use cannabis from the rec market for medical reasons only. And medical cannabis, as prescribed by a doctor in Canada, represents only 1% of the population. So you've got medical patients representing 5 times the amount in both incidents of patients getting their product from the recreational market rather than being prescribed by doctors. If we move on to some insights into product formats and segments. So many medical markets, cannabis flower is the most popular product category, or remains one of the most popular product categories, and I'd in large part give credit to the options available to patients. The SMV Farm survey report in Germany showed that the bulk of flower sales are to people who have previously purchased product on the illicit market and get it from their GPs, so general practitioners, while north of 60% of prescriptions, that darker channel there, is for dronabinol, and usually prescribed by specialists, i.e. in anesthesiology for pain indications or others. So while this data BFARM acknowledges might be skewed as flower consumption levels are likely to be higher, it does give some interesting insights. Another notable element across this is that we can see, speaking to the pharmaceuticalisation trend, extract sales have gone through market growth across the board year on year since the study began. So, beg your pardon, is there any water around? Thanks. Extract sales have gone through market growth, further reflecting the pharmaceuticalisation trend. So it's something that we should all look to get into if we're planning on targeting medical markets or going towards pharmaceuticalisation as we go. So in Europe, while legalisation is gaining traction, medical pathways are generally the only route to market access as we are today, that people can access without legal transgression and to ensure product quality. So recent developments in Germany will, of course, realize some interesting data as we go through the private and association level use, and I expect to see dronabinol and extracts continuing their growth trend, at least in terms of imports, while flower will likely contract, given its increased availability at a private level. So this is a trend to watch. And how do we deal with pharmaceuticalisation and legalization or liberalization going forward? So there's many medical markets still to open up. There's going to be longer or broader opportunities as we go over the next couple of years. But it means we need to deliver quality, diversity, and value into medical markets with a view towards consumer packaged goods in your own production, domestic country, or a speculative view towards trade, which really is speculative nowadays given international treaties in place. Otherwise, focus on clinical pathways towards pharmaceuticalisation. The relative compound annual growth rates of each of these markets speaks to the trend. So obviously these things do need to be bracketed and are based on current dynamics and levels. So just take the numbers and figures here into account. But if we look, the top line is currently adult market or illicit use. These are global figures. So sits at around 35 billion odd euros value today, and it's got a compound annual growth rate of 15%. Medical cannabis, the orange line sitting in the middle, sits at a market value of around 13.5 billion today globally, and with a compound annual growth rate at around 25%. Whereas pharmaceutical cannabis, while it's only valued at 1.5 billion today, this includes sales from Epidiolex, Sativex, and registered APIs, has a compound annual growth rate of around 62.5%. And we can see somewhere around 2030, there's an inflection point. This takes time, or this makes sense given the development time and process involved in actually going through the clinical registration pathways. And that intersection, or this broader macro trend, is something that I think we should all be aware of and watch. So, interesting insights that GW's Epidiolex sales last year were at around 546 million euros globally, or dollars globally. So it's the same as the entire medical market for Europe expected this year. It's gone through compound annual growth of 42.5% over the last 3 years, and it's registered and reimbursed. So GW's pharma or products are registered and reimbursed in 36 and 27 countries respectively, 36 for Epidiolex if it's not clear there. So product registration brings with it broader market access, clinicians' confidence based on targeted clinical outcomes, health insurance reimbursement, as well as tangible value drivers for those creating the product in the end. It's how you get those high-level valuations. So we've discussed the crossover between adult use, pharmaceuticalisation, and medical markets as an interim channel. And it's something that will present challenges and opportunities as we go ahead in the European market with more medical markets opening up. But bear in mind, it will be an interim channel. It's longer term. The one side of it will be hotly contested, and the other side will be prescribed away based on targeted clinical outcomes. So while we'll still experience continued growth and ongoing over the next couple of years, it's something to be aware of. Medical producers that fail to focus on specific value drivers today will likely be left behind in the future. So key to success in an evolving landscape today is to deliver value and quality, watch current trends and cater to them, while also considering longer-term pharmaceutical pathways or adult use options in your own markets, otherwise retaining a speculative view to trade in the same. So other than that, let's look for ways to collaborate and build the industry. If you are going down the clinical pathway side, be open about it and look to share, find the right partners, and spread that relative cost of registration through those horizontal opportunities. I guess that's it from me today. So thank you very much all. If anyone has any questions, and beg your pardon for the scattered speech. It's my first time on the block.
You did great, dude.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you very much, Gustav. Do we have any questions for Gustav at this point from the floor? Yeah, okay, I'm going to bring the mic to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your speech. You talk now a lot about the European market. Can you describe shortly what's the situation in the South African market?
Sure. So in South Africa, there's technically medical frameworks in place, so unregistered pathways. So it's called a Section 21D in South Africa. The problem is it's a named patient basis, and there really isn't a market there. It's quite difficult to get individual applications over the line. They can take some weeks to materialize. That is growing at this stage, but operators in South Africa generally service, so you get licensed by the regulator SAHPRA for GACP, GMP cultivation, or GMP manufacturing like we are. And then your opportunities generally sit in export markets. So there isn't really a domestic market with legal pathways. Yeah. Hopefully that changes. We're overdue on some legislation at this stage. Josh will have some interesting insights to speak about it. It's a big passion of his.
Yeah, well, one more question. You showed before the trend of the cannabis worldwide, and the medical cannabis will surpass the illicit cannabis and the recreational in 2030 something. But on the other hand, in the markets in which medical cannabis and adult use is legalized, like Canada, you were mentioning before that just 1% of the patients really buy from the medical market, and probably 5% from our patients from the medical market, but they buy from the adult use. So how is it going to happen, this inversion of trend that seems to be the other way around?
I tried to explain it on the other side of things. I mean, it's difficult to model that, and I did try and bracket in that large growth driver pathway. That graph referenced our current compound annual growth rates and what's expected across a range of different sources. So Grandview, Prohibition Partners, general industry resources that I'm sure we've all read. And there is likely to be an inversion later on and a changeover in those growth patterns with dynamics like that coming into play. But those take into account sort of extraneous factors that we can't really account for or acknowledge when they'll happen now. So building that into anything, at least at my level of Excel use, isn't really feasible. But I mean, if we look at the pain market, it's today valued at $69.1 billion. And if we compare the two, or the difference in patient outcomes for cannabinoid-based therapies versus opioid-based therapies, it does speak to that sort of level of growth. And similarly, those metrics across Epidiolex sales, which is prescribed for Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, two types of epilepsy, and the sales of that product internationally outstrip the whole European market today. So that's sort of the argument behind it, and that inflection point and where that big growth comes from. And I'm sure we'll see much more changes to come in the future as we go. But thank you. Anything else? Anyone? No?
Thank you, Gustav. Okay, so we're going to... thank you.